So, I mean, your argument is that there's been this long attempt to create a realist version of language. But if we accept that everything is ineffable, we can't really intervene. Is that so we need a further theory, some way, as you say, that closure is a way, otherwise we're just lost and we can't really do or say anything. Is that am I praising insufficiently, I'm sure, but do you want to say more about this?
In part, I mean, the realist trope, in a philosophical sense, has been, dominant for the last, at least in North America and the UK, since Russell and Wittgenstein overturned Hegelianism back in the turn of the 19th century. It's not so much that I think we need to bolster that theory. It's just that I think it's failed. I mean, right. There isn't a decent realist theory. Wittgenstein in the Tractatus came to the conclusion that it's logically impossible. In terms of what I was putting forward, though, and in the context of what Genia was saying later Wittgenstein, I see the proposal that I'm proposing in terms of openness and closure as, in a way, a response to what I see as being the difficulties of the later Wittgensteinian position. So it seemed to me Wittgenstein abandoned the idea to describe the relationship between language and the world because he'd come to the conclusion in the Tractatus that it wasn't logically possible. And in his later work, far from being able to say everything, he doesn't think that you can say anything at all about the essential nature of our predicament, what the nature is between nature of the relationship between language and the world is at all. So he avoids it. So he's constantly avoiding saying anything in terms of an overall philosophical view. And that seems to me to be a certain sort of bad faith, that the way that we understand the later Wittgenstein is to impute this view to him that we are just all in a language game. But he can't quite say that, because if we imagine it as there we are humans and we're operating in this language game, we're somehow trying to step outside of language and say how it ultimately is. So we have to try and catch on to the fact that he's trying to tell us something about what's going on, but he can't quite tell us. And I can't buy this. I think we do need an overall framework which in a sense is in the Wittgensteinian position of not being able to have a realist account of language, but which enables us to be able to operate and function. And the account that I've indicated you of in terms of thinking of the world as being open, and we provide closures which enable us to intervene, is an attempt to build that sort of framework, which is not a realist framework. It's not saying this is how it ultimately is. It itself is a metaphor. It itself is a closure. But I would obviously advocate that it's got some value and it helps us make sense of where we are, and you might find it useful in the way that you operate in the world.
I'm going to bring Genia in a moment on Wittgenstein. I just wanted to press you one more question. So is the premise then that, in a way, it's a language game to divide things into ineffable and effable, as it were, so inexpressible in language and expressible, that's almost a rearrangement of things in relation to the possibility there is something beyond, that's not adequate, so that almost everything's inexpressible at one level, but then we can't do that?
Yes, I'm not sure I fully understand your point there. I mean,
so would you say
that
philosophically this is effable, this is ineffable, or within a closure system, could you do that?
Yes. Well, the vocabulary of openness and closure is trying to find some way to get outside of the puzzle that, of course, as soon as you refer to the inevitable, in some sense you can't, because you've actually just referred to it as something, and therefore you've made it. I mean, the first philosophical work I wrote was called Reflexivity, and it's exactly about that problem of self-reference. Yeah. So in a way, it's trying to find a solution to that and to say, give up on the idea that the world is something in particular. Anything in particular, think of the world as being open, and we find ways to close it. And of course that applies to what I am saying now and to the theory that I'm putting. It's a way of closing the world, and it helps us intervene. Of course, I'm not saying that this is a new truth. That would be absurd. But I do think we have to engage in trying to create theories. We have to try and provide metaphors, try and make sense of where we are, while recognizing that they're never going to arrive.
Thank you. Genia, would you come in on this question? You said nothing is inexpressible in principle, the Wittgensteinian remark.
Well, actually, I'd like to say something in response to
Yes,
what
please
Hilary
do.
has
Yeah.
said about Wittgenstein, because I'm afraid I completely disagree with virtually everything you've said about Wittgenstein.
Great. Well, sit back and watch, audience.
So on the early Wittgenstein, I mean, he didn't think offering a theory that connects language and world is logically impossible. I mean, he thought you can't express it in propositions, but language shows it. And he still thought he could talk quite a lot about what can't be said. And this is why he's got the metaphor about throwing away the ladder at the end. I mean, it obviously ends in logical paradox. He's presenting a theory and then at the end saying, well, actually, this theory can't be expressed. So throw away the ladder after you've climbed it. And obviously, that's hugely unsatisfactory. But he did think that he presented a true, if paradoxical, and not actually, in the end, stateable theory. But he did think he'd captured something about what the relation between language and the world is. Now,
shall I just respond? So I'd just hold it slightly differently. Of course, we'd be talking about the same key bits here, and whether Wittgenstein sort of held what he was saying in the Tractatus as being true, which is you're saying he presented this as a true theory.
What he says in the preface, the truth of these thoughts seems to me unassailable and definitive.
Sure.
Seems very...
But he also says at the end we have to throw it away. So those two are not compatible. He can't on the one hand be asserting it as saying it is true, and at this other hand saying that he's throwing it away. So the way I read it,
it's ineffably true.
Is that he does as well as he can to say how it is. He thinks he's got the best realist theory out there, but he concludes at the end, but I can't do this. And as a result of that, he abandons this philosophical position in his later work because he's come to the conclusion that you can't do it. So that would be my way of understanding that, rather than saying, oh, actually, Wittgenstein was in the position of believing that something was true that he said is impossible.
Well,
do you want to just respond quickly?
Well,
on that?
I mean,
he
thought, and I'm not saying that this is a view that anyone should take, but at the time, I think he was committed to the thought that this was an ineffably true theory, can't be expressed in propositions because propositions can only state facts. But nevertheless, the way he characterized the relation between language and the world, he thought that was correct. If it could be capturable, counterfactuals, then that's how it would be. But obviously that's a huge problem, and he did change his mind. But actually, I think, weirdly enough, he didn't change his mind because of that problem. He changed his mind because of the colour exclusion problem. He changed his mind because he thought it's no longer correct that elementary propositions are independent of each other. But that might lead us too far afield.
Thank you.
For more debates, talks and interviews, subscribe today to the Institute of Art and Ideas at IAI TV.